what was it like to revisit those vulnerable moments?
Well, it's really interesting because I have sat down to write my memoir many times, and I just wasn't in the right headspace. And when I sat down this time, it was like there had been a distance and a learning and a growth that comes with age, with experience, and with making mistakes of my own.
Right. Welcome to Her Art, Her Heritage, a podcast that features women from Newfoundland and Labrador who showcase their unique culture through their art. I'm Ellen Rogers, and joining me today is author, producer, managing editor, and promoter Pam Pardy. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. You published a memoir last March. Can you tell me a bit about your memoir?
Well, it's called Probable Fate, and it's from the Bay to the Byline. So I just wanted to take a little glimpse of my life and share it with others. I'd been writing for so many years and telling other people's stories, and now I wanted to officially tell my own.
Perfect, of course, completely understand. I'm wondering, I have read the book, so I was wondering what it was like to revisit those moments of your life, the harder parts of the book. What was it like to revisit those vulnerable moments?
Well, it's really interesting because I have sat down to write my memoir many times, and I just wasn't in the right headspace. And when I sat down this time, it was like there had been a distance and a learning and a growth that comes with age, with experience, and with making mistakes of my own.
Right.
So that I could see now as a parent who has a 29-year-old what it is actually like to have a child and to think you're perfect and realize you're not when they've, so it was just a perfect time. And so there was no anger at what had happened, and there was no emotion necessarily, but it was just the ability to tell the story as it was and offer some kind of healing that I had felt, that I was hoping, and people have told me that they also felt in the writing.
Right, perfect. I was wondering, in the hard parts of the memoir, how did you add so much optimism and humor to it? Like, how did you go about that? Because I found that very interesting as I was reading it.
Well, I think it goes to the old adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And my personality is such, I mean, there was hard things in my upbringing and family, but also my parents were incredibly resilient. My father's incredibly funny. My mother now is facing dementia, and she's hysterically funny. Like, in her clarity, she's like, oh, I'm just going to flunk, but I won't even know that I am. I'm not even going to realize that it's happening, and that's the good news. So she has this sense of humor, and my mother, as I told in the story, actually had some horrible things happen to her growing up. And her sense of strength, I mean, some things come by nature, some things come by nurture, right? So it's a little bit of combination, what's in you, and then what you learn and adapt to. And I think that it comes across in the book that, I'm not in a horrible place in life. My life was a gift. Probable Fate talks about, there's some things that you're destined to experience that you have no control over, but then you do have control over how you react.
Yes. Well, that's going to come up to my next question, actually, basically. You quoted in your book, "I now hold the pen and sit in the director's chair." And I really enjoyed that quote. I loved it. Can you explain to our viewers what you meant by that?
Well, this goes back to someone much wiser than me, and that's Jeff Sterling. So, if anyone knows my history, I was the managing editor of the Newfoundland Herald for a number of years. Jeff Sterling was, the founder. When the Herald closed and I finally left the family company, the Herald was 76 years old. So Jeff Sterling used to say, you are the director of your own movie.
Right. Love it.
So it's you decide how things are going to affect you. You decide your next step. You decide what you're going to do because you are the director. Nobody else holds the pen. Nobody else holds that camera. This is you. And I wanted to make sure that message gets around. people my generation remember Jeff Sterling and might relate to that, but I think this book is, it shares that forward. It passes the torch, so to speak. And we do. This is our choice. You chose to be here going to school, and when you finish, it's up to you really what you do with it. You may face some challenges, but you can just kind of weave and duck and go and slap that smile on your face.
For sure.
And for goodness sakes, paint your nails.
I'll take that suggestion into consideration, definitely. To that question, I was wondering, in your experience, what would you suggest to other people who feel stuck not sitting in the director's chair and writing their own story? How might they get out of not writing their own story, kind of thing, and avoiding their probable fate?
I think it's hard. And we have a lot of things coming at us. I mean, I know I get in discussions with friends. I had somebody watch my talk similar to this, and they reached out to me personally, and they felt like they were stuck. And my words of encouragement is, where you are today, like, look back at your life. What you thought was terrible, like whether it was a boyfriend who broke up with you, or something happened with your parents, or whether it was the loss of a pet, whatever it was, you do eventually. You feel at the time you're never going to get over it. You're never going to get past it. You're never going to feel happy again. Life is over. You lost a job, nothing. But that's not true. If you give it a day, a week, a month, next thing you know, that huge disaster in your life is just not even a chapter.
Yeah, so small.
It's just so tiny. It might not even make it to the film. So it's not important.
Perfect. So I'm going to get into a bit about your background now. Could you tell me what your childhood was like?
Well, growing up, it was equal parts, and I get into this in the book, the best of times, the worst of times. So my family had businesses, and so they had money. My grandparents were close by. My father had fishing routes, which I think growing up in Newfoundland, if you don't have those fishing routes, you're missing out, because I was out in that dory with my father. It was a babysitter because my mom had my older sister with her. She was running her business, so I was sent off in the boat. Fabulous upbringing. But also because of those circumstances, and of course nature, nurture. My father's on my grandmother's side had a lot of alcoholism, so my father started to drift into those ways, and things were hard. I write in the book about, being tucked into bed outside a gun closet, for bullets, because my mother was afraid that overnight my father's drinking was going to turn into something where he was going to probably load a gun. Not fun, not funny. But yet, my father is one of the most wonderful men. He's 83 now. And, this was this stage of his life, and he had an addiction. Right. My mother had horrific abuse growing up, and we didn't find out about that until we were much older. And it enabled us to look back at the, because people were smacked back then, but we were more than smacked. It was more than that. That what we had endured, but when we found out what my mother had endured, we were shocked and surprised that she was able to give what she did give. Right. So, there was it was equal parts wonderful and enriching and empowering and also at times abusive.
Gotcha. A bit of a lighter question now. I was wondering if you always had a voice for storytelling, or did that come later and something that you got into later? Like, did you always love to write, like, throughout your adolescence and your youth, or was it more of a later thing?
What I remember writing first was that grade 6 speech, and I talk about it in the book. So I was the first kindergartner, my class were the first kindergartners at Upper Gullies Elementary School. So it was a brand new school, brand new open, we started it. So graduating grade 6, we were the first people to complete this whole, from the grade on up. And I was asked to be valedictorian, and I couldn't think of anything, and I was struggling. And my mother, with these multiple businesses that she had, and one of them was a nursing home, which I talked about. So, we had multiple residents living in this home, and meals and staff, and my mother is buzzing around the kitchen, and I'm there, crying and tearing up paper. And she finally took a moment and sat down with me. And I think in my memories, and maybe, my darling mother did sit with me more than this, but in my memory, this was one of the first times that she actually sat just with me. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, Pam, she brought that up. You're the first graduating class. And I'm just like, oh, so that got me writing. And then, other things that just made us special, and it registered. And then after that, I remember filling book after book after book after book.
Really? Wow.
Love is like the almighty wave that crashes down to meet the grave amidst the towering cliffs that hold up the sky, the way its mighty chest collapses and dies. Just poetry and stories and stories. So it started there. But the journalism love came from interviewing in grade 7, so a year later, Joey Smallwood.
Nice.
For a project for school.
Cool. Very cool.
So it was a Newfoundlandia project. Everybody else was interviewing Nanny or Poppy, and it was my aunt that said, well, my dear, why don't you look up Joey Smallwood? And I was like, I can do that? Sure. And at that age, you had no fears. Like, interviewing Joey Smallwood, to me, was nothing.
Yeah.
So off we marched. And I have since then interviewed every single premier except Frank Moore's, who was dead when I was in grade 7, but every single one.
That's so awesome. I love it. You did talk about in the book, there was one part you mentioned that was about how when you hit puberty, your self-esteem and your mental health kind of took a downward spiral.
Right.
What I'm wondering is, what was that like when mental health was such a stigmatized issue at that time?
So not only at that time, it's only been the last 2 years that I've even sought out help for my own mental health.
Right.
Over the years, I lost someone in my life through tragedy, and I went and saw a grief counselor. So little pieces. But it was like, you had to be perfect, man. And you had to know what you were doing, and you had to hold it together, and there was so much pressure. And at the time, when I graduated journalism school, but I started doing working for a computer company, and I was rising in the ranks, and like, you couldn't just walk away from anything, and then to admit that you were not well.
Yeah.
And as a child, my mother was a public health nurse as well as all these other things. And to tell my mother I was bulimic and I was anorexic for 2 things, and asking for help and having her tell me just to zip it and never bring this up again. And I was purging underneath the deck,
How do you revisit that? Right? I understand.
Yeah. So if she couldn't help me, and the times, she found me intoxicated as a young age, and hide your drunk ass in the room, right? Don't let the neighbors know. And I'd run away from home during one of my father's drunken, abusive, outrage situations, and the naked little footprints would be in the snow outside people's homes, and it would be
Right.
So it was really, it was hard, and I'm so glad. That's why I do a lot of advocacy and free work with Mental Health Foundation of Canada, because it is so important to have those conversations and to not leave it in the dark, and to not leave it until you're 50 to address it if you can help.
I completely understand. So my next question is, in your career, what impact has growing up in Newfoundland had on your career and your writing and your storytelling and your ability to storytell?
I think, look, Newfoundlanders are special. And I don't care where you're from, where you're watching this, anywhere in the country, Newfoundlanders are special. And we're unique. And we have, every one of us has the ability to storytell. Not all of us write stories, not all of us do creative work, but we can tell a story. And we have a story. And when I went away, I recognized, I was in Ontario for a number of years, and there was a curiosity about Newfoundlanders. So I knew I automatically had an audience, because everyone was expecting something funny, something unique, a little accent, just something. So I knew I had that power of recognizing that there was something interesting about Newfoundlanders. When I returned home in 2003, and I moved back to rural Newfoundland, little outport, bought a little store, And the gift that I had been given from being away so long was now I was seeing us, Newfoundlanders, through this unique-ish lens, and how beautiful it was. And I think when we spoke before, I mentioned that, somebody came into the store, they were looking for carts. And I was like, okay, well, you want a shopping cart? No, you don't want a shopping cart. Oh, you want an arm cart? No, you don't. You want carrots?
Carrots.
Carrots? And then it was clots. And I thought he wanted, blood to make blood pudding. And it was actually, he wanted like paper towels, cloths. I was just like, oh my goodness. So I told all those stories. So by this time I'm writing for The Independent at the time and the Newfoundland Herald. And I just got so much love from audiences because, people don't realize they say things like, when are you going to get your, I wrote a story about getting my deck done, hiring this guy. And what was the timeline? Later on, buy and bought it once. That was my timeline. I'm paying him for this contract. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, perfect.
Right? And that's the language and that's the culture. And that's, so having the ability to tell that stories from being away and seeing it from two different perspectives, I think gave me the gift. And it also made me say, look, you got a story. And I can guarantee to pull it out of you. So over the years of the Newfoundland Herald, thousands of people's stories I've told.
That's great. Last Wednesday, you hosted a fundraiser. It was called Raise Your Voices. Can you tell me a bit about the cause?
Yes. So Saltwater Community Association is in Bonavista, Vista, and they raise money for transitional housing for anyone who's displaced. So for women and children who are displaced. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting in life because everyone feels that they know you. I answered my phone and I'm Marlene. I'm like, hi, Marlene. And next thing you know, I'm spending the next bunch of months of my life planning this fundraiser. Right. It was wonderful. Mm-hmm. Mary Walsh was our headliner, and we had Matt Wright, and we had Dana Reed and the Observers there as a band, and then I had the privilege of hosting it. So, and it did really well. I don't know the final totals because they're still like ticking through anything, unless you might know it. But do you?
I don't.
You know? I was like, oh, you're gonna tell me now. And here it is. So the last I was speaking with Marlene, she was still telling the totals, but everyone was very happy with the outcome.
Our producer Thomas Jordan was there, and he did get some video.
Yes.
And I think he did enjoy it.
Yes. He better have.
He did. Can you tell me why the issue is important to you?
I think, back in, my mother had her nose broke by my father in one of the incidents, and now they're very happily married. They've been together forever, and, my father did quit drinking. So, there's a happy ending, I guess, to that story and to how that happened. But there was nowhere to go. That kind of thing, even sometimes today, is a secret. And there's nothing on the Bonavista Peninsula to support families like that. They would have to come to town where you have no supports. You're leaving maybe a pet behind, which is terrible. You're leaving any support that you do have to get out. And you shouldn't have to be the one to leave your community or your safe area and your support system. So that's why it's so important.
Yes, I understand. Last couple questions now. Do you have any plans for another book?
Yes, I actually have 3 written.
Oh, wow.
I just have to get the covers done and kind of do a timeline. Well, one of the books, so when I wrote this, and of course folks were buying it, I started getting messages from people all over Canada saying, why didn't you tell this story? Why didn't you tell that story? Why didn't you tell this story? And I would be like, I forgot. So I have a book ready now called The Things I Forgot.
Oh, that's very clever.
And it's actually, it's humorous stories, things that I had forgotten that I had done, and one of it was I almost went out to sea with the Coast Guard from this young fella I was dating. So it's really scandalous. Okay. I almost ended up out at sea on the Anne Harvey. So it's quite a story. So I have a bunch of those kind of stories. And things that would make my mother blush, and thank goodness she'll never remember when I'm fondly admitting all these things that I've done. So there's these, so it's kind of more fun. Mm-hmm. And
a little bit more light.
Yeah, and it's all just little stories. And then I wrote a story, so a big theme in my book, I think, and in my life is I lost my brother to suicide. And I sat down and wrote specifically just about that, because some people, I think, they've been asking, like, how do you deal with it, and what did you do, and how did you get from acceptance, how did you go through the stages of grief and even what they are. So I've written something about that, and then I wrote a real fanciful story that I'm just still playing with, and it's total rural Newfoundland, and it's so much fun, and I'd love to do something like a play with it. So I'm trying to explore some different options. Right. But the things I forgot will probably be out in a couple of months. Okay. So many ideas.
That's all the time we have.
Amazing.
Thank you for coming on with us today so much. We appreciate it very much, and thank you.
I had a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you.